This is part 2 of my conversation with my guest and expert witness, Mark Russell, the Chief Executive of the Children's Society. Together, we talked about Principle 6. Individually, we're one drop. Together, we're an ocean. It was fantastic to talk with Mark, who I've known for so many years and admired for even longer than that. It's brilliant that Mark is now the CEO, the leader of the Children's Society, which is born out of the Church of England and embedded with wonderful values, doing extraordinary work around the country in poor communities everywhere to change round opportunities for children and to bring to them a different future. So, Mark, you've sat there and you listened to me that, as I've been talking, I'm very aware that this is what you do. The Children's Society has served for years to create safety, community, love, belonging, hope for young people. So as I'm speaking, what resonates with you and what do you think I'm missing?
Steve, I'm always happy to listen to you when you talk. I always learn something new. And I agree with everything you've just said. And you're absolutely right. The Children's Society has been around for 140 years. And for those 140 years, we've sought to be there for the most disadvantaged young people in our society. But what you were describing about the broken systems around us is what we see in our day job every single day. And, I was in the Department for Education a few weeks back for a meeting, and I was in reception waiting to be taken up to see a senior civil servant. And there is a wall of all of the secretaries of state for education. Yes, you know that wall, don't you? The Rogues Gallery in the front. And there were 5 secretaries of state last year. 5. We've had 10 in the last 9 years. And I've been the chief executive of the Children's Society for 4 years and 2 weeks. And I've had 7 children's ministers in that period. We have a lack of leadership in government at every level around children and young people. And I met the previous children's minister, who's just gone off to become the energy secretary, who's a good person. And I asked her, I said, "You're the children's minister?" "Yes, I am." "Excellent, congratulations. Let's chat about children's mental health." She said, "Oh, that isn't our responsibility. That sits with the Department for Health and Social Care." "Okay, can we talk about children in the justice system?" No, you need to go talk to somebody in the Ministry of Justice, and so forth and so forth. Is that what we need? And I think you're absolutely right. It is a very important first step would be to rearrange the operation of government to prioritise children and young people. And so we've been calling, along with our friends across the children's sector, for a cabinet minister for children for ages. The ICSA inquiry into child sexual abuse also called for a cabinet minister for children to join all the bits of government up that work with young people. Frankly, what I think we need in this country is a strategy for good childhood. What does it mean to be a child in 21st century Britain, and how do we help children flourish? How do we help ensure that the money we're spending delivers real change in children's lives? And you mentioned at the very beginning of this podcast the care system and the shocking outcomes for young people in the care system. And our teams work with young people in the care system every single day. And we see young people being placed hundreds of miles from the communities where they grew up. We see young people being continually moved through different homes. We see homes that are being run for profit by big private equity firms. And all of that is not about flourishing children. You see children being moved from one home to another and with a bin bag to move their possessions. So one of the things our team do is a tiny little thing, but we give children a suitcase and dignity that they can move with a suitcase rather than a bin bag. I've got a friend called Chris Wilde who's written some books about his experience in the care system. And he's now working in the care system because he wants to be the person who wasn't there when he grew up. And he talked about, it made me cry in his book actually, he talked about a young person coming who had multiple placement breakdowns, who was highly vulnerable, at risk of criminal exploitation. And Chris picked him up, brought him to the home, and he'd made his bed. He'd made his bed, and beside it he'd put some sweets and some, Diet Coke, whatever it was, and some gifts. And this young person walked into the room and burst into tears. In his whole life, nobody had ever made a bed for him in his life. And there's these tiny little things that make a colossal difference in a child's life. One of the projects we work on at the Children's Society is called Inside Out, and it's such a project close to my heart because it works with young people who are the most at risk in the care system. And I met one of those young people, let's call him Jay. And Jay has had a highly traumatic life. He's been in about 14 different accommodations in his 17 years of his life. He's had all kinds of shocking experiences with violence and trauma, and he's had a very unhappy experience in school his whole life, and has been seen as a troublemaker. He's been seen as bad news. He's been seen as just somebody everybody wanted to get shot of. And what Inside Out does is it journeys alongside that young person. We have a colleague who will walk with that young person over a period of years. You know, we call it all kinds of trendy language, you know, like empowerment and, you know, coaching and mentoring. You and I know it as good old-fashioned youth work. Yeah. It's the long-term, consistent relationship of a trusted adult who loves this young person, who invests in them. That young person's life has been turned around. I gave him an award. To be honest, we picked them up on Amazon for about a $5, but I may as well have given this kid a gold medal in the Olympics. He'd never been given anything before to say, well done, ever. And suddenly I appear on the screen and he couldn't get his head around the fact that I was like the big boss of the Children's Society. And he goes, why are you giving me this award? I said, because Jay, you're flipping fantastic. You have turned your life around. You've made huge strides. I think you're amazing and we're giving you this award. And he was literally like on top of the world. We had an independent person evaluate that program. For every pound the Children's Society spends on that program, it saves the taxpayer 7. Because that child is not getting in trouble with the police. They're not ending up falling out of their placement. They're not going missing. And they're not causing trouble. In fact, they're being positive influences in society. And what you're absolutely right. You know, we need a new start, a total reset in all of this that enables the state, the statutory organisations, the voluntary sector to partner way better together. I believe without question you cannot disconnect the £2.5 billion the government have taken out of youth work over the last decade with all of the challenges we're seeing in children's lives right now. And, you know, like you, Steve, you can dress me up in a sharp suit and call me a CEO, but actually in my heart, I'm still a relational youth worker. That's where I started my career. And I believe passionately in the power of youth work. I'll give you a quick example. Some years ago, you'll pick up from my dulcet tones I'm from Northern Ireland, which I am remarkably proud. And I was a youth worker in a wee town called Lurgan, which is about 25 miles south of Belfast. And I was a youth worker around 1995 to 1998 in that part of the world, which coincided with the Good Friday Agreement, which is a phenomenal time to be alive. And while I was there, the work that we did with some very disadvantaged young people got the respect of the police, and they really valued what we did. And the police called me up one day and said, we've got a really difficult young person that we are seeing falling into crime all the time. And of course, back then in Northern Ireland, it wasn't just crime. You could be dragged into terrorism and shocking stuff that, you know, put that child's life at risk. So this young person was at risk of being groomed by a terrorist gang. And the police asked me, would I help him? And I said, sure. And let's call him Sean. And so I did what every youth worker does with Sean. I, took him to McDonald's, we went bowling, we went hiking, and we got under the skin of the huge trauma that this young person had been facing all of their lives. And I just invested in him. I gave him time. I cared. I was at the end of a phone. I, did everything I could to support him. And anyway, the long and the short of it was he went off to Newcastle University. He turned his life around, and that was fabulous. I moved to England and got a job with the Church of England working in Hertfordshire. And that was that until last year, when I was on doing what you do often. I was on the telebox and I was on Sky News talking about criminal exploitation, actually. And Sean clocked me on the television. And I thought, oh my goodness, that's my youth worker. He's our chief exec. How'd that happen? And he found me on Twitter and sent me a message and said, do you remember me? I said, of course I remember you. So he gave me his number and I rang him. And what is Sean today? He's the deputy head of a primary school. And I said, what on earth happened? He said, you happened. He said, and I decided I wanted to be the guy for other young people that you were for me. And that's the power of youth work. It invests in young people and turns them around. And I think cutting £2 billion out of youth work over the last decade has been a terrible, terrible mistake. And I think the more I thought about this, I was thinking about it. Obviously, at the moment in the news, we've got all the shocking stories around schools and concrete and roofs falling in. And the more I've thought about this, the more I've realized that I think for our society and for politicians and for the Treasury, we see children as a cost. We see children's lives as a cost. I think children are an investment, and we need to invest in children. It was Gordon Brown who said that children are 20% of our present and 100% of our future. And I believe we need to return to that kind of wisdom. There was a 17th century American philosopher called Frederick Douglass who said, it is much better for society to build stronger children than fix broken adults. And I think he was absolutely right. And so that's why I agree with your chapter. I think it's right that, we need to rediscover the power of the voluntary sector. We need to discover the power of community groups. We need to see the voluntary sector as glue that can hold all of these bits together. And I believe in all my heart, actually, that people in our society are inherently good and they want to make a difference and they want to make the world better. And I believe the job of civil society and for organizations like the Children's Society and Oasis is to give people a vehicle by which they can be involved and to harness an army of men and women up and down the country who want to make the world a better place. When I was a youth worker in Hertfordshire, there was I had the problem every youth worker has. I ran out of volunteers, and I worked for a church, and I asked the vicar, could I have a slot first thing in Sunday mornings before the service to appeal for help. And I got up to the front and I talked about the work we're doing, said, I need help, I need some more volunteers, please. And at the end of the service, a 77-year-old man called John came up to see me and offered his help, and my heart sank. I thought, oh no, this is not the kind of person I want. With due respect, what can you do with the young people in my youth group? But anyway, I said, look, let's have a couple of weeks trial and see how it goes. I have never been more wrong in my entire life. John was one of the best youth workers I ever had. He was the grandfather to a group who's, because of family breakdown and challenges in family, who didn't have a grandparent. They loved him in so many ways. He was a tower of strength in that youth group. And when he died, all these kids who were now in their 20s all came back and went to his funeral. So I think we do need to empower our community. We need to release volunteers. We need to help society invest in children and young people. And ultimately, I think the place to start is by providing the right leadership at government level. That I think your book is absolutely right. We've got a generation of short-term thinking. We've got a generation of one politician gets the job and sets out an idea and then another one comes along. I think the long-term 20-year plan is right. Use the resources we're spending better and smarter to deliver better outcomes for young people. And I was having a conversation with a minister off the record. So because off the record, I definitely won't tell you who it was. And he turned to me and he said, Mark, do you think all we ever do in government is put sticking plasters on things? I said, yes, Minister, that's all you ever do. But right now, blood is gushing from wounds everywhere and we need sticking plasters. But why don't you ask yourself, what caused the cut? What caused the wound? And how do we stop it happening? I said, that's what leadership is. And that's what our country needs. So we're going to be pressing hard as we head towards an election that our politicians do take note of this, that do want to have a long-term plan for children. And we're not going to rest till we do. At the moment, too many children are being left behind. We've got an education system that delivers for some and not all children. And we need radical reform. And that's why I love your book. It is bold, brave and compelling.
That's very kind of you to say. So why do you think we don't get it? When it's so obvious that everything you've said is just common sense, isn't it? Mm-hmm. At one level. And yet it doesn't seem it's very common.
Part of me thinks actually that we just don't have long-term thinking in this country. And we don't think about anything beyond a 4-year electoral cycle. And that's where we have to start. We need a vision for childhood. We need a vision for good childhood. The Children's Society produces a report every year. We're about to publish our latest one. It's called the Good Childhood Report. It is the only survey of children's happiness in the United Kingdom. Government incidentally measures adults' happiness, but not children's. We do. That's simply asking children, how is life for you? How do you feel about your life? And for the 16 years we've reported it, children's happiness in this country has gotten worse and worse and worse every single year. And I don't think it's going to be a shock if I announce that next week's report will announce another fall in children's happiness and children's well-being. And I was talking to a politician who sits on the House of Commons committee for the Department for Levelling Up. And I said to the politician that I actually think the levelling up policy is the right policy. I think we do need to level up. I said, but for children and young people, you've got the wrong metric. The metric the government have picked for levelling up for children is GCSE maths. I think the levelling up metric for children is happier children, better children's well-being. Children are more confident, more resilient, and more hopeful. And that data that we produce every year shows that without radical change, we are storing up huge problems for these children when they become adults. So I think it starts with leadership. I think it starts with a strategy for good childhood. I think it starts with a strategy that puts well-being and happiness at the center. Because my hunch is, and you're the educationist, you can tell me, but my hunch is if children are happier and more confident and living in a secure home, have enough food on their table and heat in their radiator, that they have people around them who love them, those children will do better at GCSE maths.
Absolutely, they're more ready to learn.
Yes.
One of the things I did some time ago now, there's a group of kids, teenagers, who were just not in one of our schools. They were persistently absent, but they were on the roll. And so I managed to collect them all up, and I took them to Starbucks for the morning. And of course, they all came in. They bought the biggest coffees with the biggest amount of cream on top you possibly could, and then had the cheekiness to go back and ask for more cream when they but they sat there all morning. We sat there all morning and we just talked together and laughed together, etc., etc. And it's all about getting them in a place where they're ready to learn, rather than trying to shove them into a system, which is what you're talking about, isn't it? A child that feels noticed, feels seen, feels heard and understood is going to be in a completely different place, and they will do better. In actual fact, just this year, since I've written the book, in the last few months, we've had the SAT results for our primary schools, around reading and writing, etc., etc. And the primary school in Oasis that did best, 30% higher than the national average in SAT. So you've got schools all over the country compared on the same scale. 30% above what's called national is a school where children come to us from a very low beginning point. It's a school in a particularly poor community in socio-economic sense. And these children outperformed everybody else in Oasis, and they outperformed by 30%, the national average, all the middle class schools. And it was because what we'd done through the year there as an experiment, which we're going to roll out to our other schools, we worked with social work trainees and psychology trainees, and we formed a liaison with some of the colleges so that they come in and they sit and they work with the children, because we worked out, to exactly your point, that if a child feels more comfortable and likes themselves and feels liked, they'll deliver better. We've been running this pilot for 2 years, and after 2 years of doing this school performed 30% better than the national average, when it was performing well below it before.
That's fantastic. You talk about this in your book as well, but actually around trauma and anxiety that children face. But also, if children absorb the issues that are going on in the family home. And so if mum, dad, parents, carers are stressed that they can't afford to heat the home, they can't afford to put food on their table, those children will carry that stress and anxiety into the classroom. At the moment, we've got over 4 million kids in this country living in poverty, which is a national outrage and disgrace. And we could do something about that. And you know that, and I know that. That's a political choice. We're tolerating 4 million children living in poverty. If we wanted to change that, we could, because we've done it before. We've seen the last Labour administration took 1 million children out of poverty. We've got 4 million currently in poverty. We know from our research that the most disadvantaged young people in this country are facing up to 7 different issues in their lives at the same time. And what your book talks about is how, in so many different ways, the statutory system salami slices children's lives. And that professional deals with that little bit of the child's life. That professional deals with this. And those professionals never talk to each other. There's no connection. And actually, I sat in a meeting with some of our team the other week in Manchester, who were meeting some different statutory organisations. And the wonderful thing was, it was the Children's Society had brought those agencies together. And that's what I mean about the voluntary sector can be the glue that brings these agencies together. And we had social work, police, others in the same room talking about the same individual young people and comparing notes and working out how they could do things better. And that kind of transformation is what we need on a bigger scale. But I'm really concerned about children right now. I'm concerned about poverty. I'm concerned about mental health. We know that about 90% of all spending on mental health for children is on crisis intervention. So that's young people who turn up at A&E with self-harm or attempted suicide. We are not investing in early help, prevention, early intervention, well-being. We're not giving young people the toolkit to face life in a better way. So I'm really concerned about that as well. And And we know because of the pressure with austerity that most spending on young people is now going to the statutory crisis end. And we're not investing in communities. We're not investing in families. We're not investing in early help. We're not investing in family hubs, aka Sure Start as it used to be known. We can do so much better, Steve. And your book sets that all out, exactly how we can deliver that. And that's why your book matters, because it's not just your good ideas. It's good ideas that you've road tested for 40 years of your life and investing your life in families and communities. And actually, I hope that book gets into the hands of cabinet ministers and politicians and special advisors, because the wisdom and the advice is there. Do you know what? The thing about living in Northern Ireland is that I believe that politics can deliver change. Because I'm part of a generation who grew up with bombs and violence and horrendous nightmares going on all around us. And nobody thought peace could ever happen. But it did. And actually, in fact, the back of the book, you've got Tony Blair, and he played a critical role in that. Peace happened. Politicians delivered change. And the people voted for it in a massive referendum that nobody thought could happen. And I saw in the Good Friday Agreement that politics and politicians with ideas, collaborating across the political system, can deliver transformative change that has radically changed the future for Northern Ireland. And I believe with all my heart that we can do it in this country for children and young people. Some years ago, I read an article by a writer called Rebecca Solnit in The Guardian. And she said that optimists and pessimists are the same. They both believe they don't have to do anything at all. She said the optimist doesn't do anything because the world will always be better. And the pessimist doesn't because it will always get worse. Solnit says the world is only ever changed by hope-filled people who dare to believe that their actions, their voices, their behavior, their choices, their money, their voice can affect change. And that's why I love your book, because it's called A Manifesto for Hope. We need hope-filled people who dare to believe that, yes, the crisis is massive. Yes, it's huge, but we can fix it. We can turn it around. We can make our world better. We can be a country that invests in children and lets them walk tall and be the best versions of themselves. I've given my life to that. I'm not going to rest till it happens. And I know you have as well. And that's why the Children's Society's vision is so simple. Our vision as an organisation is a society that is built for all children, that no child is left behind. Every child can be the best versions of themselves. And until that day, we've got work to do, but I'm up for it.